I'm Jim Check. You're watching KelownaNow. I have with me Blair Qualey of the New Car Dealers Association of British Columbia. And you guys put out a press release recently.
Yeah, just following the nail biter of an election we just went through, we thought we'd come out quickly and talk about some of the issues that we're hoping the government will look at once things settle down in Victoria and they get to work. So
Yeah, you.
we outlined two or three sort of burning issues that have been on the mind of the dealers that we raised actually during the election with all of the parties, encouraging them to put them in their platforms. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, you. One of the things that I noticed in there is obviously the and the shift EVs and that mandate where they're saying that all new cars have to be EVs by 2035, and this could end up there's a penalty that could end up costing $20,000 per vehicle, and that obviously would get passed on to the consumer.
Sure. And, I mean, the next target actually is 2026 when they're looking for 26% of new vehicle sales to be electric vehicles, qualifying vehicles in the province. And then, of course, 2030 is 90% and 2035 is 100%, as you mentioned. Those targets are coming up pretty quick and pretty fast. To me, 90% is pretty much 100%, and that's only in 5 years. So we've seen across the province sort of a softening of demand for EVs. Now, we've done quite well, I have to say. We led the province and for a while led North America in the adoption of EVs. But the regulations that the government's put in are the most stringent in North America. And we're just saying, kind of take your foot off the accelerator a little bit. It's a little too much, too fast, especially as the natural demand seems to be softening. Early adopters of the technologies of the EVs have come and gone, and that helped us get to where we were in adoption rates. And now it's kind of regular people who ask about, how much is it going to cost? How, far can I drive in it? Where am I going to charge it? Those kinds of issues. For people in the interior and rural areas of the province who travel normally greater distances than folks in the Lower Mainland or Southern Vancouver Island, those are really serious concerns. You also have weather impacts on the batteries, etc. So lots of folks are a bit worried about making the step right into EVs right away. A lot of folks are saying, geez, maybe plug-in hybrid electrics are kind of the next step for these kinds of things. And so we're encouraging government to kind of take a sober second thought on these really stringent targets that they've set, because it's going to impact consumers. And as we heard through the election, affordability was such a key issue for all of the parties. And I think a message was sent clearly from the electorate that, that is a concern. And so anything that's going to add additional cost to, the average British Columbian, and you pointed out that, the penalties, if you're outside selling a vehicle that's outside of these sort of arbitrary targets, the penalties upwards of $20,000 a vehicle. As you said, it's going to be passed on, of course, to the consumer. But the other thing is, manufacturers, if they can't meet these targets, it's a ratio. So if you can't fix the top part of the ratio, which is the number of EVs you're selling, you have to fix the bottom part of the ratio, which is everything you sell in the province.
Total sales, yeah.
And right, and they're going to reduce the number of all vehicles into the province. And when we went through COVID, we saw what that did. The shortage of vehicles drove prices for new and used vehicles through the roof.
And the confusing part is they had an EV rebate in British Columbia that had and they changed the cap on that so that, like you said, in there, 75% of the EVs don't even qualify for that anymore.
Yeah, well, we've been working with government for goodness, I think, 12 or 13 years on the program and the effort, and the dealers in the province really wanted to be a part of the solution on all of this. So that's why we took on the administration of the program years and years ago. But yes, government just announced in June some changes, significant ones, to the qualifying vehicles list of the program, and they took out basically 75% of the vehicles that were on that list, many of which were the ones that people actually need, the SUVs and trucks, and various other things. So it's kind of, defeating the purpose. We've
It's
always
very,
said,
very hard for like an average vehicle, which is $50,000, to qualify for that rebate.
yeah, no, I mean, and then you add, the challenges of the extra costs that may come from with the mandates can make everything more expensive, and there'd be less and less vehicles available under the rebate program. So, we're suggesting government not only, do something about the mandate, but bring back some rebates so that you can help bridge the cost between a gas vehicle or an EV and the gas equivalent, and make that up, because that really worked for many, many years. It's kind of like a three-legged stool. You have the rebates on the vehicle to help with the price differential. You spend lots of targeted and strategic investment in charging infrastructure and help people get chargers at home and in their workplaces. And then third, you spend some time, effort, and money on education of people, because the electric vehicle driving experience is different from what everybody's used to from a gas-powered vehicle, and you need to help them understand all the cost savings that come with it, and what it's going to be like to drive.
Yeah, and then the charging network itself, I think that's part of the issue. I mean, I think it's pretty solid in the Lower Mainland and stuff like that in the highly densely populated areas, but not so great as you get into the smaller communities and get into the northern parts of the province.
Yeah, well, even in the Lower Mainland and southern Vancouver Island, where they've invested in a lot of charging infrastructure, it's still not enough, especially if they're going to stick to the kinds of targets that they've set for the number of EVs sold. Uh, Rural parts of the province, it's a real challenge for folks. They've done some effort on trying to put charging along the sort of main arterial highways through the province, and I congratulate them for those efforts. But we need a lot more where people live, work, and play all around the province, just not the Lower Mainland.
Yeah, I understand. Like with Tesla opening up their supercharger network, that's helped, and I see that Ford is I think most of the manufacturers have adopted that standard now, and I think it just takes a little while for them to get it into play into their vehicles.
Right, but at the same time, it takes a while to do these things, and we have these mandates staring us down at the moment. So hence the concerns about
Yeah,
that.
and I would say that, like, do you have a percentage and number of vehicles sold right now? You represent, a wide range of dealers, and how many of them are actually like, what percentage of that would be EV sales and what would be traditional sales?
Out of I haven't seen the recent Statistics Canada number, but it was we were up earlier in the year, 22, 23, 24%. But then now, with the changes to the rebate program and the softening of demand, it's now down much closer to 20%, or even under at 19
Mm.
and something. So we're seeing a softening of demand, not just from the change in the rebates, but just as sort of this middle group of people
Yeah.
come to terms with what EVs are like.
And then the high interest rates obviously don't help when people are looking to purchase a new vehicle. That's
No,
another
no,
impediment.
the changes that have come from the Bank of Canada have been good news for dealers and their customers, but we're going to need to see more of that. And there's lots of talk that perhaps next year we'll see more and more uh, cuts to the rate. But yeah, affordability remains a big issue for everybody, whether it's groceries or rent or your mortgage payments, and then you have to worry about transportation and taking the kids to school or soccer practice and getting to work, and all of it's really challenging at the moment. So
And if you look
anything.
at a state like Colorado, I don't know if you've looked at it, but the state of
Mhm.
Colorado, there's the federal grant of $7,500, and then there's Colorado, I think it's like $5,000, and then there's another, and then there's some zero interest loans floating out there in the United States for some of the manufacturers and that. So it really makes it easier to make that shift, and obviously a good charging network and all that kind of stuff. So I think the government has to do their side of the equation to make it easier for people.
Well, it's funny because government here actually listened and came to us early on and said, "Geez, we're thinking about doing these things, and how do you think it should work?" And that's when they asked us to administer the Clean BC rebate program, and they listened to us around targeted investments in charging infrastructure and the rebates. That we had good rebate levels here in the province for many years, but governments are faced with lots of places to spend money, and there are lots of demands on them around that. And so I think they're having a look at a pretty significant deficit at the moment, and where to come up with that. We'd suggested to former Premier Horgan at the time that we need a sustainable source of funding for EVs, EV rebates, and they turned to BC Hydro for that. BC Hydro generates electric power, and for that they generate credits, which they then can sell in the open market internationally. And that's been the way they've generated the money for the rebates so far. But now we've seen with BC Hydro facing challenges around the generation of electricity in the province with the lower snowpack in the spring and drought conditions in northeast BC. That's even become more of a challenge for them in terms of generating the dollars to fund the rebates. But
And
we hope government will go back to that.
and the other thing that you mentioned is that the luxury tax, and a lot of times that luxury is a pickup truck, right? It's not necessarily a luxury, but just because it hits a dollar threshold, it all of a sudden becomes a luxurious item.
Well, it's trucks, which is really quite frankly silly. But it's also a lot of the vehicles now that regular families need to get by in their lives. The minivan that soccer moms are taking kids to games and they're going to work and picking up groceries and doing all the things that families need to do these days. The threshold hasn't been adjusted for the luxury tax since 2006. So it's been $55,000 for a long, long time. And
Can't buy a lot of vehicle for that right now. That's like an average price of a vehicle.
the average price of a vehicle is actually
Well, there you
$66,000 in
go.
Canada now.
Yeah.
So it's way below the average price. I think governments tend to get addicted to these kinds of streams of money and are afraid to step back and go, geez, if we made adjustments to it, where are we going to make up the money? We understand that, but they promised several different governments over the years have to look at it and do a proper review of the tax, and I think it's long overdue, and I hope that government will now step up and actually do that and move the threshold to something that's more of a luxury level. The
Yeah.
federal government picked $100,000 is where they start their luxury tax, which they layer on top of the BC government luxury tax. But at least that's maybe considered by many more appropriate than $55,000.
Yeah, and the other one that's really odd is that you can actually go out and buy, I don't know if this is still the case, but you go out and a lot of guys are going, instead of buying a 3/4 ton pickup, they buy a 1 ton so they can escape the luxury tax, right? So it's not like it's stopping people from buying like a $150,000 1 ton has no luxury tax, but a $75,000 bare bones kind of like Ford pickup is taxed at luxury.
Well, it forces people, quite frankly, into more vehicle than they actually need. And when we're concerned about the environment, and gas consumption and those and emissions, et cetera, and also the impact on the roads in the province. So having people get into bigger things than perhaps they need doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so what's missing is common sense, right? Because if they hadn't looked at it since 2006, and then all of a sudden they're just all these 1 tons are being licensed, it's kind of, I guess, you make some more money on the 1 tons, but like it doesn't make sense for the regular consumer though that they're paying luxury tax on a like a pickup truck that they need to get their family and around in.
Well, yeah, and these little minivans that so many people need now, small SUVs. Since 2006, the cost of everything has gone up dramatically, including the technology in these vehicles, the materials, paints, all sorts of stuff is more expensive because it's much better and much safer. But they haven't kind of adjusted the threshold for a long time, and it's
Would it make more sense for, like, you guys got to go to the table when they're, putting up the Clean BC stuff? Would it make more sense that there's an annual review where the Car Dealers Association gets to sit at the table? And this goes for everything, Airbnb, all these different things where they put out these hammer regulations that just kind of like blanket everything, where you can sit down and say, hey, this is going to affect this, this, and this, right? And this is going to affect like the regular family that's just trying to get their kids to soccer practice, trying to get their, like the different things going on, and get more input in there so that the decisions can be refreshed a lot faster than 2006 legislation.
Absolutely, and beyond that first threshold of the luxury tax, there's kind of what we call the super luxury tax levels, which start at 100 and 120, $150,000, and at the very high end, when you combine it with the federal luxury tax, you're paying potentially 38% of the value of your vehicle is tax. And a lot of people, governments say to me, well, won't they just pay it? Well, no. Lots of folks will find ways not to pay it. And in Kelowna, you'll see a lot of Alberta license plates because a lot of people go and purchase their vehicles in other jurisdictions to be able to get around the tax.
I was at the car show just recently down in Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
and I got into a beautiful Escalade, like a beautiful truck, right? Or big SUV. You know what I mean? I guess maybe at the higher end of the SUV things, but I think the truck was like 150,000, but it was over 212 or something like that after you added all the luxury taxes and all the taxes on that. But that same vehicle in Alberta was, I think, $32,000 cheaper.
Yep. Well, a lot of people just say, look, I could take the money that I will save on the luxury tax and invest it in a property or something in Alberta or another jurisdiction where I can go and use that address, still have the vehicle in BC, but use that address for the purchase. And it just doesn't make sense. And when the government introduced in, I think it was 2019, those super luxury tax levels, we went back to government 6 months later and said, look, since you've introduced this, our dealers are now remitting 30% less tax to you than before that. So was the purpose of your tax to actually reduce the income to the province? Well, no, but that's the result of it. So to your point of an annual review, absolutely. We present every year to the legislative committee on budget and financial services in the province and make this case every time. But government needs to find some courage around this and actually do what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's just common sense because like that $32,000 difference, because when the person goes to resell that vehicle, I mean, there's obviously they're competing against Alberta vehicles and that are already starting out of the gate at $32,000 cheaper.
Yep, 100%.
And so it makes it really tough, and it's like kind of unfair, I guess, if you're between British Columbia and Alberta, because we're only separated by an imaginary border to most of us, right? We didn't see anything when we drive. I'm actually driving to Calgary today, but I don't remember going through any border checkpoints or anything, right? So
no, it happens more and more and more. I'm hearing it from the dealers all the time of that influence from the lower tax jurisdiction right next door, and it's time to fix this thing.
Yeah, and if you look even in Quebec, their EV rebate is like $7,500, and like I said, if you look at the state of Colorado, the huge incentives, right, that make people rush into the dealer and take advantage of those things, as opposed to where we're seeing I don't even know what EV you can buy for under $50,000. It's got to be very few.
It's very, very few, and there's lots of people having the conversation around the kitchen table about electric vehicles, wanting to do it, and what they need now is some help to make that final decision to put their toe in the water around electric vehicles. And the best way to do that is to make sure not only they understand all the issues of it, but they have the differential in price is bridged by a rebate.
And the big thing about a lot of car dealers, because most towns, like even Kelowna, there's a ton of dealers here, but they contribute a lot to the economy of the city. Right. Mm-hmm. And, because I mean, like, what did you say? You told me before we went on, how many billions of dollars does the new car dealers contribute a year?
Well, our just over 400 dealers around the province generate about $17 billion in economic activity and revenue in the province, and generate lots in taxes. Yeah. They employ, over 30,000 people around the province in the 55 communities they're privileged to do business. So yeah, it's an economic engine in local communities for sure.
Well, there's a ton of spin-off stuff there too, the tire shops and there's tons of spin-off activities off of there too, right? It's a big driver of our economy for sure, and provides a valuable service because we live in the second largest landmass in the world, and obviously we have some distances between our cities and towns, and a lot of people have to travel, and a lot of people in this area need pickup trucks too. I mean, it is pickup truck country.
100%, and I hear it from the dealers all the time up there that they just need government to pay attention and listen and do what they said they were going to do around the luxury tax and incentives for the electric vehicles, because our guys want to sell these vehicles. Their manufacturers have spent billions of dollars in research and development and delivering all of these vehicles because government said this is where we're going. But now, with demand softening, governments are all pulling back on these incentives, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I'm going to throw a political question at you, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. November 5th, there's a big election, and there's a guy that if he wins has said that he's going to rip up all these EV mandates. And I think that would be good news for a lot of the legacy automakers south of the border. But how do you think that will fare for the Canadian side of the border?
Well, I mean, the Canadian situation, we haven't really aligned ourselves that much with what goes on in the States. BC's decided to do its mandate program all on its own and made it one of the most stringent in North America. The federal government has done its own mandates. But clearly, if the U.S. ginormous market that the U.S. is, if the leadership down there changes and decides that they're going to get rid of mandates, I think it'll send a strong signal to the Canadian government and hopefully the BC government around what's going on in the global situation around electric vehicles. And we're not saying that it's not good to have aspirational goals around the number of EVs and getting to where we need to be. But these arbitrary targets with these penalties that are going to drive up costs for everybody just makes no sense.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense to incentivize people and show them that it's a better path. Like it's just like the iPhone. People will buy an iPhone because it's better, right, than a flip phone. Mm-hmm. And it should be the same thing for EVs. People will make that change when it's better and it actually works out better for them instead of forcing somebody to do something.
Well, governments have chosen a technology. One thing about the current U.S. Situation is their targets are based on emissions. They're not based on the number of vehicles sold or a type of technology. The idea down there was, if you want targets on the amount of emissions, then you set, targets on the emissions and you allow business and the folks that know how to develop vehicles and technology to find the solution to get you there. But governments in Canada and BC have actually chosen a technology. They've chosen electric vehicles as the solution, and that seems to be a big challenge.
Well, I've kept you for a half an hour. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd want to leave us with, or?
Well, just one quick thing. The third thing we talked about in our recent news release to government after the election was around making sure that we're investing in spaces and support for institutions in training of skilled trades in the province, in particular service technicians who need to fix all these complicated vehicles that are available to consumers today. We have a real shortage of service technicians and people that can fix your car or truck, and we need government to lean in and help us make sure we're getting more people through the system and into dealerships to fix the cars and trucks we drive today.
There you go. And I think the biggest solution is if we can get them at the table and you guys get to go to the table too. And I think that's the same thing that goes for wildfires. The same thing goes for everything. I think business needs a seat at the table with government. I think that's the common theme. I do a ton of interviews with forestry and all kinds of stuff. And the common theme, I think, is the government needs to start listening.
Well, I appreciate the time today and thanks very much. We'll have to do this again.
You betcha. And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent.